Greetings. This is Doc Ock coming to you live and direct from Black Facts Headquarters Central today with another wonderful story for you today. But let's start off where we always do with our proverb of the day. If you burn a house, can you conceal the smoke? That would be the question. If you burn a house, can you conceal smoke? Almost forgot. Okay, now. All right. Moving on. Poem for the day. Oh, by the way, that proverb is from the nation of Buganda. So the area of East Africa, Uganda, the Uganda people. Now, for the poem today, we've got an original here. The blackest of truths. As you gather your gear and prepare to hear of the Old West and who was the best, with a gun and a knife, it appears black men filled the top 10. Up till now have their stories been scarce as hen's teeth. Today, all that changes as I'm about to make them as well known as corned beef. They say the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. If that is true, then consider this the blackest of truths. Absolutely ruthless. Yes. So today's story is all that and a bag of chips. Because today we are featuring the story of Mountain Man. That's what they called them back in the days. They called them mountain men. These were men that went out west and knew how to survive, how to live, how to trade, how to deal, how to trap and skin animals and sell the furs. And, you know, they were quite skilled in a number of areas, including the being able to communicate with the Native Americans in a number of different languages. The most important of those being sign language. Because if you could speak sign language, you could talk, it didn't matter what the actual language was that they spoke, you could speak by signs. So if you could do that, you were in good shape. And this is something that Africans did very well. African to a extreme degree. We keep, a lot of the stories that I've been telling, we keep hearing about these African Americans who were the interpreters for the a particular expedition that went out here or over there or somewhere. And James Beckwourth, he was one of those. So the good thing about his story is that he is going to tell us his story in his own words. He's going to tell us his story in his own words. Now, as usual, we're not going to read the entire book because that would take the rest of the whole month. But we're going to read some portions of the book, select readings from the life and adventures of James Beckwourth. So let's see where we want to start at today. The good thing for us is that he didn't give titles to his, didn't give us any titles to his chapters. They all are just numbered. So I'm going to read from the preface. Yeah, we should be able to do the entire preface today. So we'll read from the preface, and then we'll hopefully we'll be able to finish the preface today, and then get into some more of the text tomorrow. Buried amid the sublime passes of the Sierra Nevada are old men who, when children, strayed away from our crowded settlements and gradually moving farther and farther from civilization, have in time been domicilated. There's a word for you. Domicilated. Among the wild beasts and wilder savages, have lived scores of years, whetting their intellects in the constant struggle for self-preservation, whose only pleasurable excitement was found in facing danger, whose only repose was to recuperate preparatory to participating in new and thrilling adventures. Such men whose simple tale would pale the imaginative creations of our most popular fictionists, sink into their obscure graves unnoticed and unknown. Indian warriors whose bravery and self-devotion find no parallels in the preserved traditions of all history in their career on the warpath, quote unquote, sing in triumph their death song and become silent, leaving no impression on the intellectual world. Among the many men who have distinguished themselves as mountaineers, traders, chiefs of great Indian nations, and as early pioneers in the settlement of our Pacific coast is James P. Beckwourth, whose varied and startling personal adventures would have found no record but for the accident of meeting with a wanderer in the mountains of California. Interested in the man and patiently listening to his story, proceeded as it fell from his lips to put it upon paper. This autobiography was thus produced and was the result of some months' labor in the winter of 1854 and 1855. In prosecuting the task, the author has in no instance departed from the story of the narrator, but it was taken down literally as was from day to day related. Beckwourth kept no journal and, of course, relied upon his memory alone. Consequently, dates are often wanting, which it was impossible to give with accuracy when recurring to events transpiring in the course of very many years. Beckwourth is personally known to thousands of people living on both sides of the mountains, and also from his service under the United States government has enjoyed the acquaintance of many officers of the U.S. Army who have been stationed in Florida, Mexico, and California. In his long residence with the Indians, he adopted their habits and was in every respect conformed to their ways. The consequence was, from his great courage and superior mental endowments, he rose rapidly in their estimation and finally became their chief. As an Indian, therefore, he speaks of their customs and describes their characteristics. And probably from his autobiography, we have more interesting particulars than were ever before given of the quote-unquote Aborigines. Interesting choice of words there. Beckwourth, after 10,000 adventures, finally became involved in the stream that set toward the Pacific, and almost unconsciously he established a home in one of the pleasant valleys that border on Feather River. Discovering a pass in the mountains that greatly facilitated immigrants in reaching California, his house became a stopping place for the weary and dispirited among them. And no doubt the associations thus presented have done much to efface his natural disposition to wander and seek among the Indian tribes. In person, he is of medium height, of strong muscular power, quick of apprehension, and for a man of his years, very active. From his neck is suspended a perforated bullet with a large oblong bead each side of it, secured by a sinew. This amulet is just as he wore it while chief among the Crows. With the exception of this, he has now assumed the usual costume of civilized life. And it is in his occasional visits to San Francisco, vies with many prominent residents in the dress and manners of the refined gentleman. It is unnecessary to speak of the natural superiority of his mind. His autobiography everywhere displays it. His sagacity in determining what would please the Indians has never been surpassed, for on the most trying occasions, where hundreds of others would have fallen victims to circumstances, escaped. His courage is of the highest order, and probably no man ever lived who has met with more personal adventure involving danger to life, though in this respect, he is not an exception to all mountaineers and hunters who early engaged in the fur trade and faced the perils of an unknown wilderness. Yeah, that's the prologue. I hope y'all following this. Chapter 1, Birthplace and Childhood. I was born in Fredericksburg, Virginia on the 26th of April, 1798. My father's family consisted of 13 children, 7 sons, and 6 daughters. I was the third child, having 1 sister and 1 brother older than myself. My father had been an officer in the Revolutionary War and had held a major's commission. He served throughout that glorious struggle, which raised the dignity of man and taught him to be free. I well recollect when a small boy the frequent meetings of the old patriots at my father's house, who would sit down and relate the different battles in which they had taken part during those days that tried men's souls, quote unquote. According to the custom of those days, their meetings were occasionally enlivened with some good old peach brandy, and that's what I'm talking about. The same kind, I presume, as that with which the old Tory treated McDonald when he delivered his splendid charger, Selim, to him for presentation to Colonel Tarleton, which circumstance was frequently spoken of by the old soldiers. Often during these reminiscences, every eye would dim and tears would course down the cheeks of the old veterans as they thus fought their battles o'er again and recalled their sufferings during the struggles they had passed through. My youthful mind was vividly impressed with the stirring scenes depicted by those old soldiers, but time and subsequent hardship have obliterated most of their narratives from my memory. One incident I do recollect, however, related by my father when he formed one of a storming party in the attack on Stony Point made under General Wayne. When I was but about 7 or 8 years of age, my father removed to St. Louis, Missouri, taking with him all his family and 22 Negroes. He selected a section of land between the forks of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, 12 miles below St. Charles, which is to this day known as Beckwourth's settlement. At this early period of our history, 1805 to 06, the whole region of country around was a howling wilderness, quote unquote, inhabited only by wild beasts and merciless savages. St. Louis at that time was but a small town, its inhabitants consisting almost wholly of French and Spanish settlers who were engaged in trafficking with the Indians the commodities of civilization, such as firewater, beads, blankets, arms, ammunition, etc., or in other words, those animal skins we were talking about earlier, for protection against the Indians, who were at that time very troublesome and treacherous. It became necessary for the whites to construct block houses at convenient distances. These block houses were built by the united exertions of the settlers, who began to gather from all quarters since the Jefferson Purchase had been effected from the French government. The settlers or inhabitants of 4 adjoining sections would unite and build a blockhouse in the center of their possessions, so that in case of alarm, they could all repair to it as a place of refuge from the savages. It was necessary to keep a constant guard on the plantations, and while one portion of the men were at work, the others, with their arms, were on the alert, watching the wily Indian. Those days are still fresh in my memory, and it was then that I received, young as I was, the rudiments of my knowledge of the Indian character, which has been of such inestimable value to me in my subsequent adventures among them. There were constant alarms in the neighborhood of some of the blockhouses, and hardly a day passed without the inhabitants being compelled to seek them for protection. As an illustration of our mode of life, I will relate an incident that befell me when about 9 years old. One day, my father called me to him and inquired of me whether I thought myself man enough to carry a sack of corn to the mill. Now, corn, that's going to weigh it's going to weigh at least 50 pounds. The idea of riding a horse and visiting town possessed attractions which I could not resist, and I replied with a hearty affirmative. A sack of corn was accordingly deposited on the back of a gentle horse selected for the purpose, and young Jim, as I was called, was placed upon the sack and started for the mill 2 miles distance. About midway to the mill lived a neighbor having a large family of children with whom I frequently joined in boyish sports. On my way, I rode joyously up to the little fence which separated the house from the road, thinking to pass a word with my little playmates. What was my horror at discovering all the children, 8 in number from 1 to 14 years of age, lying in various positions in the dooryard, with their throats cut, their scalps torn off, and the warm lifeblood still oozing from their gaping wounds. In the doorway lay their father, and near him their mother, in the very same condition. They had all shared the same fate. I found myself soon back at my father's house, but without the sack of corn. How I managed to get it off, I never, and related the circumstance to my father. He immediately gave the alarm throughout the settlement, and a body of men started in pursuit of the savages who had perpetuated this fearful tragedy. My father, with 10 of his own men accompanying them, in 2 days, the band returned, bringing with them 18 Indian scalps, for the backwoodsmen fought the savage in Indian style, and it was scalp for scalp between them. The day when I beheld the harrowing spectacle of my little murdered playmates is still as fresh in my memory as at the time of its occurrence, and it never will fade from my mind. It was the first scene of Indian cruelty my young eyes had ever witnessed. I wondered how even savages could possess such relentless minds as to wish to bathe their hands in the blood of little innocents, against whom they could have no cause of quarrel. But my subsequent experience has better acquainted me with the Indian character, as the reader will learn in the course of the following pages. So I think I'm going to knock off right there. There's a little bit more left of this chapter, but that is a very good introduction, I believe, to the life and adventures of James P. Beckwourth. He was named after his father, and you notice his hair has this kind of look to it. You can tell it's curly, it's coarse, but it's also kind of straight. So he was mixed. His father was white and was a slave owner. He owned his mother, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know when or if he freed her, because I haven't heard about her yet in this book. But he treated James Beckwourth as he would a son. And so that was the relationship he had with his father. So him and his father both had the very same name. So as I end this piece, let me just end it by saying Fredericksburg, Virginia, my peoples come out of Virginia too. Matter of fact, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was born 1799. So right around the very same time, he was a year younger than James P. Beckwourth. His father also was white, but he was also born free. He was not born into slavery. But understand this, that when you talk about mixed families, we've been having mixed families forever. But the mixture I'm talking about is not what you're thinking about necessarily. Yes, his father was white and his mother was black, but at the same time, his father was free, but was his mother. I imagine she had been freed, but at one time she had been a slave. When my great-great-great-great-grandfather went to take a wife, who was he going to marry? Could he find a free black woman in Virginia? He grew up in Manassas, Virginia, right there on the battlefield where they fought the first battle of the Civil War, and then came back and repeated it, the Battle of Bull Run. So he ended up having to married a woman that was a slave up the road. So now you got a free man marrying a slave. So he had to buy her freedom. Then he had to buy his children's freedom also. So you had these mixtures, and then some of those children that had been slaves, he was not able to buy them before the end of the Civil War, before Emancipation Day. So therefore they were still in slavery, but obtained their freedom after Emancipation Day. So now you have some that were freed after Emancipation Day, one that was bought out of slavery, one that was born free. That's what I'm talking about. That's a mixed family. So you think about our actual families, not our imaginary family that lived in slavery, because most of us don't know who our real family was that lived during those times. We only know the imaginary one that we heard about in school. And so what we're doing here, we're going to take you beyond that. And for those of you living in California, up there in Sacramento, one thing you can do to make this whole story real is go on up to Marysville and then take the highway out of town headed east. And as you head east, you'll go right to the home of James Beckwourth. It's still standing there today, and they've turned it into a small, but I'm sure powerful museum. I never got a chance to go there with my children, but if you're still living there, please take a ride on up to James P. Beckwourth's house, because that was an important way station for the settlers coming from the east headed to the west. They came right down through that pass right into Marysville. And I probably will read the part where he talks about Marysville and the incident in Marysville, because there was an incident that occurred in Marysville. That'll give you a better idea of some of the local history that's related to James P. Beckwourth. So that's all for today. This is Doc Ock signing off. Don't forget, we got to make your donation to our 2020 campaign. We're trying to raise $20,000 by October 20 in the year 2020. Help us get there with a flare. Do it now. Show everybody that you care. Just show yourself. You can donate any amount from $5 up. You can do it below. If you're on Facebook, if you're not, you can go to our Black Facts website and make your donation at our website. We got a donation page there. You just donate right through the GoFundMe page. Either way, you will make our day, because we're going to tell you the stories, giving you the real truth. As we start off saying, the blackest of truths, unfettered, unvarnished, straight from the shoulder to you, because you got to get a little bolder. All right, it's time for me to go before I get any older. Peace out, y'all. We'll be black tonight at 9. And of course, we'll be black here tomorrow at noon. This is Doc Ock at noon and 9, signing off.